2 leopard cubs shivering in the cold, eyes barely open. The note said only this: "Please take care of them. I tried. I really tried. Cheers." In that moment, a man who had spent 2 years waiting to die was forced to choose whether to walk away or open a door that would change everything. Ethan Cole had driven the same back roads long enough to recognize them by feel alone. The gentle dip where the asphalt gave up and turned to gravel. The curve that always held a slick patch after the first hard frost. The old sycamore by Miller Ridge that leaned like it was tired of standing. After 40 years in Pine Hollow and nearly 35 as the town's mailman, the route lived in his hands and feet the way a hymn lived in an older man's throat. Familiar, automatic, and mostly forgotten until something made it catch. That morning, the cold had teeth. The kind of cold that didn't just bite your ears, it worked its way under your coat and stayed there, stubborn as a bad thought. The sky was the color of a dull nickel, and the mountains looked bruised in the distance. Ethan started his shift before sunrise, as he always did, sliding into the driver's seat of the postal truck with the same quiet motions he'd made for decades. Only there was no warmth in it anymore. 2 years earlier, he would have stepped out the door and heard Linda's voice behind him. "Don't forget your lunch, and you better wear gloves today." And even if he grumbled, even if he rolled his eyes, he would have smiled. Now the house was silent when he left, silent when he came back, silent in a way that made the walls feel farther apart than they used to. He kept going anyway. He went because stopping felt like surrender, and because the mail didn't care whether a man was grieving. The mail came, and the mail had to go. By mid-morning, Ethan was out past the last cluster of townhouses and into the emptier stretches where the trees grew close and the driveways were long. He was moving through his stack of deliveries, thinking of nothing in particular, when his eyes caught a shape at the side of the road that didn't belong. It was a mailbox. Not unusual in itself, there were dozens along this route, but something about this one pulled at him. It was old, built from thick weathered boards, the kind of homemade box a man with strong hands might have put together back when people fixed what they had instead of replacing it. The paint had peeled away years ago. The post leaned slightly, like it was slowly giving in to time. Behind it sat the cracked asphalt of a deserted pull-off, and, farther back, the black outline of an abandoned gas station that hadn't seen a customer since before Ethan's grandchildren were born. He should have passed it. He had passed it plenty of times. But his foot eased off the gas. Ethan felt that strange, quiet pressure in his chest, an instinct he didn't trust and couldn't explain. It wasn't fear exactly. It was closer to the feeling you got when you realized you'd forgotten something important, even if you couldn't name what it was. He drifted to the shoulder and stopped. The truck idled, rattling softly, while Ethan stared at the mailbox as if it had called his name. The road was empty in both directions. No houses nearby, no movement besides the bare branches twitching in the wind. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe someone had put in a forwarding notice. Maybe there was a package. Maybe he was just looking for an excuse to break the monotony of the day. But he knew that was a lie. He opened the driver's door, and the cold hit him like a slap. He tugged his hat down, walked over, and lifted the wooden lid. The hinge creaked, loud in the quiet. Inside was no catalog, no flyer, no Christmas card addressed to current resident. There was only a single white envelope, sitting neatly in the middle of the box like it had been placed there with care. No stamp, no return address, no name on the front at all. Ethan stared at it. The hair on his forearms rose under his uniform sleeves. He picked it up. The paper felt slightly damp, as if it had been handled with hands that were sweating or shaking. He turned it over. Still nothing, just blank white. For a moment he considered putting it back. That would have been the sensible thing. The envelope wasn't his business if it wasn't addressed. He could report it, tell the postmaster, let someone else decide. Instead, his fingers slipped under the flap. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, torn at the edge like it had been ripped out in a hurry. The writing was done in thick black ink, pressed so hard it left grooves. "Don't open the box. Look under the post. Please." Ethan read it once, twice. His throat tightened. A lifetime of delivering other people's news had taught him what panic looked like on paper. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a kid's joke. This was someone begging. Ethan looked up and down the road again. The empty gas station sat like a dead thing behind the trees. The wind moved through the brush with a dry, whispering sound. Somewhere far off, a crow called, sharp and lonely. He crouched at the base of the mailbox post. At first, he saw nothing but dead leaves and a strip of brittle grass. Then his hand bumped something plastic. He brushed the leaves aside and found a laundry basket shoved against the post, tucked into the shadow where it couldn't be seen from the road unless you stopped and looked. Someone had covered it with an old coat, denim, stained, frayed at the cuffs. Ethan froze. He could hear something now. A faint sound beneath the wind. A weak, broken little noise that didn't belong out here. His hand lifted the coat. For a heartbeat his mind refused what his eyes were showing him. Two small bodies pressed together, tiny paws. Fur patterned with soft blurred spots. Eyes barely open, cloudy, newborn blue. Their sides rose and fell in shallow breaths, and their entire bodies shivered like leaves. They weren't puppies. They weren't kittens. They were something else entirely. Leopard cubs. Ethan's mouth went dry. His hands hovered, not knowing where to touch, afraid that if he moved too fast, he'd hurt them, or that if he blinked, they'd disappear and he'd wake up back in the numb routine of his route. The larger cub made a sound, a thin, hungry squeak. The smaller one's head sagged against its sibling as if it didn't have the strength to hold itself up. Ethan felt the same hollow place inside him, the one Linda's death had carved out, shift in a way that startled him. It wasn't hope yet. It wasn't even purpose. It was something more basic than that. A refusal. Because whatever had happened here, whoever had placed these impossible animals beside an abandoned roadside mailbox, they had left them to die in the cold. And Ethan, standing over that basket, knew with a sick certainty that if he walked away, he would be walking away from the last chance his heart might ever get to feel anything again. His gaze dropped, and that's when he saw another folded paper tucked under the coat, wedged beside the cubs as if it had been hidden there on purpose. Ethan reached for it, his fingers numb, and unfolded it. Just as the wind shifted behind him and the faint crunch of tires on gravel sounded somewhere up the road. He turned his head toward the noise and his stomach tightened. A dark SUV was coming around the bend, slow and steady, heading straight toward him. The SUV slowed as it passed, tires crunching over gravel, its dark windows reflecting nothing back at Ethan. For a moment he thought it might stop. His heart thudded hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. But the vehicle continued on, easing around the curve and disappearing down the road as quietly as it had come. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking now, not just from the cold. He turned back to the basket. To the two small bodies huddled together as if the world had already taught them that warmth only came from clinging to each other. He pulled the folded paper free, careful not to disturb them any more than he already had. The note was longer than the first one. The paper was creased and smudged, and there were faint brown stains along one edge that looked like dried milk, or maybe tears. The handwriting was uneven, slanting sharply to the right, as if the person who wrote it had been rushing or crying or both. Ethan unfolded it slowly. "I tried to keep them warm. I tried to feed them. I swear I did everything I could." His chest tightened. They weren't supposed to be born here. None of this was supposed to happen like this. "But if they find out about the Cubs, they will take my kids away. I can't lose them, too." Ethan read the sentence again, and then again. "They will take my kids away." He had delivered mail long enough to recognize the difference between exaggeration and fear. This wasn't someone being dramatic. This was the voice of a person who had already imagined the worst and was writing through the terror of it. "Please don't let them die out here. They don't deserve that. If you are a good man, please give them a life I can't." There was no name at the bottom, no explanation, just a final line, written smaller, almost like the writer had run out of strength before the ink ran out. "I'm sorry." Ethan folded the paper and sat back on his heels. The cold seeped through his pants, but he didn't move. He stared at the basket, at the tiny rise and fall of the Cubs' chests, and felt something inside him crack open that he had spent 2 years carefully sealing shut. He thought of Linda. He hadn't planned to. The thought just came, uninvited, the way it always did when he was least prepared. He could see her standing in their kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands moving as she mixed formula for a half-grown raccoon they'd found near the creek years earlier. She'd looked up at him then, smiling like she always did when he complained about the mess. "They need us," she'd said, as if that explained everything. And somehow, for her, it always did. After she died, Ethan had packed away every reminder he could bring himself to touch. He'd donated the extra blankets. He'd given away the animal carriers. He'd told himself it was practical, that it was time to let go. But he'd left the bowls under the sink. He'd left the small cabinet of supplies untouched. He'd left them because part of him believed that if he erased every trace of that life, there would be nothing left of him either. Now here he was, kneeling beside a roadside mailbox, holding a stranger's apology and staring at 2 impossible lives that had no business being his problem, and no one else to turn to. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he whispered. The larger cub stirred, its small paw flexing against the blanket. It made a faint sound, more breath than voice, and pressed closer to its sibling. Ethan felt the weight of that movement settle deep in his chest. They weren't asking questions. They weren't demanding answers. They were just trying to survive. Ethan stood, stiff and slow, every joint protesting the cold and his age. He looked down the road again, half expecting the SUV to come back, to stop, to reveal someone who would explain all of this. The road was empty. He glanced at his watch. He was already behind schedule. The sensible thing, the responsible thing, would be to report what he'd found. Call it in. Let the authorities handle it. He knew that. He also knew what that would likely mean. Paperwork. Confiscation. Decisions made in offices far away from this stretch of frozen ground. Decisions that didn't account for shivering bodies or handwritten apologies. And then there was the line he couldn't get out of his head. "If they find out about the Cubs, they will take my kids away." Ethan didn't know who they were. He didn't know what kind of trouble this person was in. But he knew what it sounded like to be on the verge of losing everything that mattered. He'd lived there himself. Carefully, he lifted the basket. The cubs squeaked softly at the movement, their small bodies shifting, and Ethan adjusted his grip instinctively, cradling them the way he remembered cradling his own children decades earlier. He carried them to the truck and set the basket on the passenger seat, tucking the coat back around them and angling the vents so warm air blew gently across their tiny forms. The cab filled with the low hum of the heater. Slowly, the cub's shivering eased just a little. Ethan closed the door and sat behind the wheel, hands resting uselessly in his lap, He stared through the windshield at the empty road ahead and tried to imagine what the rest of the day was supposed to look like now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. There were a dozen numbers he could call. None of them felt right. Then he scrolled to a name he hadn't touched in years. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She had helped Linda once, long ago, with an injured fox that had wandered too close to the highway. She specialized in wildlife now, worked out of a rescue center on the edge of the county. If anyone would understand what Ethan was looking at, it would be her. His thumb pressed the call button. As the phone rang, Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror, and his stomach dropped. Far back on the road, just visible between the bare trees, a dark shape moved into view. The SUV was coming back. The phone rang once, twice. Ethan's eyes stayed locked on the rearview mirror. The dark SUV was closer now, its shape unmistakable against the pale road. It wasn't speeding. It didn't need to. It was moving with the calm confidence of something that knew exactly where it was going. "Come on," Ethan muttered, more to himself than the phone. On the third ring, a voice answered, calm, alert, female. "Wildlife Rescue Center, this is Dr. Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah," Ethan said, his voice rough. He hadn't meant to say her name like that, like it was an anchor he was throwing into deep water. "It's Ethan Cole. You helped my wife years back, with the fox." There was a brief pause. "Ethan," she said, softer now. "I remember. What's wrong?" Ethan swallowed. "I need you to keep an open mind, and I need you to tell me what to do. I've found something on my route. Something alive." He glanced at the mirror again. The SUV slowed, matching his truck's idle pace. Too close. "Ethan," Sarah said, her tone shifting, "where are you right now?" "Old gas station off Miller Ridge, by the wooden mailbox." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Okay," she said. "I need you to listen to me carefully. Whatever you found, if it's breathing, you need to get it warm. Not hot, just warm. Can you do that?" "I already have," Ethan said, "but that's not the problem." The SUV rolled past the turnoff and stopped 100 yards ahead, angled just enough that Ethan could see its brake lights glow red through the trees. Sarah heard the change in his breathing. "What's happening?" "There's someone else out here," Ethan said quietly. "I think they're looking for what I found." "Ethan," Sarah said, firm now, "get back in the truck if you're not already. Lock the doors." "I'm in," he said, fingers tightening around the wheel. The cubs stirred in the basket beside him, one making a small, plaintive sound that went straight through his chest. "All right," Sarah continued. "I want you to leave. Now. Drive toward town. Do not confront anyone. Do you hear me?" "Yes," Ethan said. "And Ethan, what did you find?" He hesitated. Saying it out loud felt like tempting fate. "2 leopard cubs," he said finally. "Newborn, left in a basket." There was silence on the line. "Sarah," he said. "I'm here," she replied. "And Ethan, you need to get to me, right now. Leopards are protected. This is bigger than you think." The SUV's driver's side door opened. Ethan's pulse spiked. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath a dark cap. He didn't approach. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, watching. "I'm not hanging up," Ethan said. "Good," Sarah said. "Put the phone down if you need both hands. Head toward Route 12. I'll stay with you." Ethan put the truck in gear. The engine growled louder than it ever had before as he pulled back onto the road. The SUV didn't move at first. For a brief, foolish moment, Ethan wondered if he had imagined the threat, if this was all fear, piling on fear. Then the SUV rolled forward and fell in behind him. Ethan drove. The road narrowed as it curved through the trees, frost clinging to the shaded ground. He kept his speed steady. Too fast would draw attention, too slow would invite it. His hands were slick with sweat inside his gloves. "Sarah," he said, keeping his voice low, "what do I do if they try to stop me?" "They won't," she said. "Not if they think you're heading somewhere public. Stay on the main road." Ethan thought of the note, of the line that wouldn't leave him alone. "If they find out, they'll take my kids away." Whoever had left those cubs hadn't just been afraid of the law. They had been afraid of someone else. The cubs whimpered softly as the truck hit a rough patch. Ethan reached over without looking, resting his hand against the basket to steady it. The warmth from their small bodies surprised him. They were alive. They were here. And someone wanted them back. As they approached the outskirts of Pine Hollow, the SUV dropped farther behind. Houses appeared, mailboxes, signs of life. Ethan exhaled a shaky breath. "I think I lost them," he said. "Good," Sarah replied. "Don't stop. Come straight to the center. I'm sending you the address." The phone chimed with directions as Ethan turned toward the highway. Traffic was light, but it was traffic all the same. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease, just a fraction. He pulled into the gravel drive of the Wildlife Rescue Center 20 minutes later, his nerves humming like live wires. Sarah was already outside, coat thrown over her scrubs, eyes sharp as she hurried toward the truck. She opened the passenger door and leaned in, her expression shifting the instant she saw the basket. "Oh my God," she whispered. Ethan handed her the note. She read it once, then again. Her jaw tightened. "This," she said quietly, "is not just abandonment." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then at him. "We have a problem," she said. "Someone just tipped off wildlife control. They're already asking questions about exotic animals in this area." Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. "And Ethan," Sarah added, lowering her voice, "if they get here before we stabilize those cubs, I don't know if I can stop them from taking them." Behind them, down the long gravel drive, the distant growl of an engine carried through the cold air. The engine noise faded before Ethan could be sure it was real. He stood beside the truck, one hand still resting on the basket, listening to the quiet settle break over the rescue center. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine. Somewhere inside the building, a heater clicked on. Dr. Sarah Mitchell didn't waste time. She lifted the basket with practiced care and motioned for Ethan to follow her inside. The warmth hit him the moment the door closed behind them, and he realized how deeply the cold had worked its way into his bones. "We don't have much time," she said, already pulling on gloves. "If wildlife control is asking questions, they're not far behind." She set the basket on a stainless steel table beneath bright lights. The cubs stirred, their small bodies pressing together, their eyes blinking against the sudden brightness. Sarah leaned in, her movements efficient but gentle, checking their gums, their bellies, the way their chests rose and fell. "Hypothermia," she murmured, "dehydration. But they're fighters." Ethan watched her hands move and felt useless. He had delivered mail through blizzards and floods. He had carried bad news and good news and everything in between. None of that prepared him for the sight of two lives balanced on the edge of a table. Sarah glanced up at him. "You did the right thing getting them here." "I don't know what the right thing is anymore," Ethan said. His voice sounded older than he felt. "I don't even know who left them." Sarah reached for the note again. She smoothed it flat and read it slowly, her eyes narrowing as she took in each line. When she finished, she didn't look at him right away. "This wasn't written by someone careless," she said at last. "Or cruel." Ethan nodded. "It didn't feel like that." "It feels like someone who ran out of options," Sarah continued. "Someone who was afraid of more than the law." She turned the paper over, studying the edges. "See this?" she asked, pointing to a faint discoloration along one side. "Smoke, and the ink here, smudged like it got wet fast." This was written in a hurry, maybe while hiding, maybe while leaving. Ethan thought of the SUV, the way it had followed him without urgency, without panic. "Someone was watching," he said, "out on the road." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Then we need to assume two things. First, whoever left these cubs may be in danger themselves. Second," she stopped as one of the cubs coughed, a thin, wet sound that made Ethan's stomach twist. She moved quickly, lifting the smaller cub and placing it under a warming lamp, adjusting the oxygen flow with careful precision. "Second," she said quietly, "these cubs are evidence." The word landed hard. "Evidence of what?" Ethan asked. "Of illegal transport," Sarah replied. "Of trafficking, of something someone doesn't want uncovered." Ethan sank onto a stool, his knees weak. He had thought the worst-case scenario involved paperwork and permits. He had not imagined this. Men in dark vehicles, quiet threats, lives hidden between the lines of a note. Sarah straightened and met his eyes. "If wildlife control gets here before we stabilize them, they'll confiscate them. That's protocol. They won't care about context. And once they're gone, we lose any chance of protecting them or finding the truth." "And the person who left them?" Ethan asked. Sarah hesitated. "If this is part of something bigger, reporting it the wrong way could make things worse. For everyone." A knock sounded at the front door. Both of them froze. Sarah checked her watch. "Too soon," she whispered. Another knock, firmer this time. Ethan felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He thought of Linda again. Not of her death, but of the way she used to stand her ground, hands on her hips, daring the world to do its worst. He realized with a strange clarity that if he walked away now, he would be walking away from more than two cubs. He would be walking away from himself. Sarah went to the door and peered through the glass. Her shoulders eased a fraction as she opened it. "Delivery," a young man said, holding up a box of medical supplies. "For Dr. Mitchell." Sarah signed quickly and closed the door, exhaling. False alarm. But the relief didn't last. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at Ethan, her expression grim. "That was a colleague," she said. "Wildlife Control received an anonymous tip about exotic animals near Pine Hollow. They're mobilizing." "How long?" Ethan asked. "An hour, maybe less." Ethan stood. "What do we do?" Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady despite the tension in her eyes. "We buy time. We stabilize the cubs, and we think very carefully about our next move." She gestured to the warming lamp, to the small chest rising and falling beneath it. "Because once the law steps in, compassion doesn't carry much weight." Ethan looked down at the cubs, at the fragile proof of a stranger's desperation. He thought of the words he hadn't read closely enough, the ones written small and almost hidden. "They will take my kids away." He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Sarah," he said slowly, "what if those weren't just words? What if the cubs weren't the only ones someone was trying to save?" Before she could answer, headlights swept across the front windows, bright and unmistakable, washing the room in white. Someone was pulling into the drive. The headlights swept past the front windows and moved on, the engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood frozen until the sound was gone, his muscles locked as if he'd been bracing for a blow that never came. When he finally exhaled, it felt like letting go of something he'd been gripping with his teeth. "Not them," Sarah said quietly. "Not yet," yet hung in the air like a warning. She turned back to the table just as the smaller cub's breathing changed. The shallow rise and fall of its chest grew uneven, each breath catching as if it had to fight its way out. A thin, wet sound rattled deep in its lungs. Ethan felt it before Sarah spoke. The wrongness of it settled in his gut. "That's not good, is it?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer right away. She was already moving, adjusting the oxygen flow, lifting the cub with a tenderness that bordered on reverence. "He's crashing," she said at last. "Pneumonia. His lungs are filling." The word hit Ethan harder than he expected. Pneumonia. It sounded old-fashioned, like something from another era, but the way Sarah said it made it terrifyingly present. "Can you fix it?" Ethan asked. The question came out sharper than he intended, edged with a desperation he hadn't planned to reveal. Sarah met his eyes. "I can try, but he's very young. Too young, really. Their immune systems aren't ready for this." She placed the cub inside a small oxygen tent and began preparing an IV line, her movements fast but controlled. The other cub, slightly larger, stronger, stirred, and let out a thin cry that cut through Ethan like glass. "It knows," he said hoarsely. "Animals know more than we give them credit for," Sarah replied, "especially when it comes to their own." Ethan watched the stronger cub press itself against the edge of the tent, its tiny paw resting against the clear plastic as if it could reach through to its sibling. The sound it made wasn't loud, but it was constant, a soft, broken call that seemed to say, "Don't leave, don't leave." Something inside Ethan gave way. He turned his face toward the wall, breathing through his nose, trying to steady himself. He had told himself he was done with this kind of pain, done caring so deeply that it hollowed him out when things went wrong. He had survived losing Linda by building walls so thick nothing could get in, and now those walls were crumbling because of two creatures small enough to fit in a laundry basket. He was angry at them for that, angry at himself. "Ethan," Sarah said gently, "I need you here, not in your head." He nodded and wiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand. "I'm here." She handed him a clipboard without looking. "Hold this and talk to him." "Talk?" Ethan echoed. "Your voice," she said. "It matters, sometimes more than the medicine." Ethan hesitated, then leaned close to the tent. The cub's breathing was ragged now, each inhale a struggle. He felt absurd, a grown man talking to a wild animal that didn't know his name or his story. But he did it anyway. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're not alone. You hear me? You've got someone watching out for you." The cub's eyes fluttered, unfocused, but its breathing steadied just a fraction. Sarah worked through the night. Antibiotics, fluids, adjustments to the oxygen. She moved with a quiet intensity that reminded Ethan of Linda in the hospital during her last weeks, focused, unyielding, refusing to give up even when the odds were cruel. At one point, the cub's breathing worsened suddenly, its small body convulsing. Sarah swore under her breath and moved faster, her hands a blur. Ethan couldn't breathe. He stood rooted to the floor, watching, helpless, as the past and the present collapsed into one terrible moment. He remembered waking up beside Linda, calling her name, knowing before the paramedics arrived that it was already over. He couldn't do that again. "Please," he whispered, the word tearing itself out of him. "Please, don't take this one, too." Sarah leaned over the tent, her voice low and fierce. "Come on," she said. "You fight. You hear me? You fight." The seconds stretched thin. The room held its breath. Then the cub coughed, a weak, wet sound, but unmistakably a cough. Its chest rose, fell, rose again. Sarah sagged back a step, her shoulders shaking. "There," she said softly. "That's it. Keep breathing." Ethan's legs gave out, and he sank onto the stool, covering his face with his hands. He didn't try to stop the tears this time. He let them come, hot and unchecked, because for the first time in a long while, they didn't feel like defeat. The cub survived the night, and the next. But the fear didn't leave with the dawn. It hovered, a constant presence, because recovery was slow and uncertain. And while the smaller cub fought to live, the larger one stopped eating. "She won't take the bottle," Ethan said on the second day, worry threading his voice. She just sits there. Sarah nodded. She's grieving, or scared, or both. What do we do? Sarah looked toward the oxygen tent. We bring her to him. She needs to see he's still here. Ethan carried the stronger cub into the room, his hands careful, his heart pounding. The moment she saw her sibling, she cried out, a sound so full of relief that it made Ethan's throat ache. She pressed herself against the tent, paw flat against the plastic. Inside, the smaller cub stirred, its eyes opening briefly as if responding to a familiar call. From that moment on, things began to change. Slowly, fragile as breath. But outside the walls of the rescue center, the world hadn't paused. Sarah's phone buzzed with updates she didn't share aloud. Ethan could read the tension in her posture, the way her gaze flicked to the windows. Whatever time they had bought with medicine and care was running out, and somewhere beyond the trees, someone else was still looking for what Ethan had found, waiting for the moment when compassion would no longer be enough. The knock came just after noon on the third day. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was firm, measured, the kind of knock delivered by someone who expected the door to open and knew exactly what he would say when it did. Ethan felt it in his chest before the sound finished echoing through the hallway. Sarah looked up from the counter where she'd been logging vitals with tight, precise handwriting. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange, Ethan understood that this moment had been coming since the second he lifted the basket from beneath the mailbox. "I'll handle this," she said quietly. "Stay with them." But Ethan shook his head. "No. This started with me." They reached the front door together. Through the narrow window, Ethan saw a man in a dark jacket with an official patch on the sleeve. He stood straight, feet planted, clipboard tucked under one arm. Behind him, parked at a careful angle in the gravel drive, was a white truck with state markings on the door. Wildlife Control. Sarah opened the door. "Dr. Mitchell," the man said, his voice polite but clipped. "Officer Dale Rourke. I'm here regarding a report of exotic animals being housed at this facility." Sarah didn't move aside. "On what grounds?" "An anonymous tip," Rourke replied. His gaze slid past her shoulder, scanning the interior. "And some unusual activity reports from the area." Ethan stepped forward. "They're under medical care," he said. "One of them nearly died." Rourke's eyes settled on him. They were sharp, assessing. "And you are?" "Ethan Cole," he said. "I found them." That earned him a longer look. Rourke nodded slowly. "Then you understand the seriousness of this situation, Mr. Cole. Leopards are a protected species. Possession without proper authorization is a violation of state and federal law." "I didn't possess them," Ethan said. "I saved them from freezing to death." Rourke's mouth twitched not quite a smile. "Intent doesn't change jurisdiction." Sarah folded her arms. "They are critically ill," she said. "Removing them right now would almost certainly kill at least one. I can document that." Rourke sighed as if inconvenienced. "I don't enjoy this part of the job, Doctor, but protocol is clear. These animals need to be transferred to a federal holding facility for assessment and disposition." Disposition. The word landed like a threat. Ethan thought of the smaller cub's labored breathing, of the way its sibling refused to leave its side. "You're talking about putting them down," he said. Rourke didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it either. "That decision isn't mine." Sarah stepped closer, her voice steady but edged with steel. "If you remove that cub today and it dies, I will put that on record. And I will make sure every outlet within 100 miles knows exactly why." Rourke hesitated. It was brief, but Ethan caught it. The calculation behind the eyes, the weighing of risk. "That sounds like a threat," Rourke said. "It's a fact," Sarah replied. Silence stretched between them. Somewhere down the hall, a soft chirring sound drifted through the air, one cub calling softly to the other. Rourke glanced toward the sound, then back at Ethan. "You know who left them, don't you?" Ethan's stomach tightened. "No?" "Then help us find out," Rourke said. "Tell us where you found them, who you spoke to, who followed you." Ethan thought of the SUV, of the note, of the words, "They will take my kids away." He thought of how easily fear traveled, how quickly it could swallow someone whole. "I found them in a basket under a mailbox," he said carefully. "That's all I know." Rourke studied him for a long moment. "You're leaving something out." "Or maybe," Ethan said quietly, "you're not listening." Sarah placed a folder on the counter and opened it. "Here is my assessment," she said. "Both cubs are under critical veterinary care. One is recovering from pneumonia. Transport at this stage would be negligent." Rourke flipped through the pages. His jaw tightened. "How long?" he asked. Sarah met his gaze. 72 hours, minimum." Rourke exhaled through his nose. "I can give you that," he said finally. "But that's it. 72 hours. After that, these animals are moved, with or without your cooperation." Ethan felt both relief and dread collide in his chest. "And Mr. Cole," Rourke added, turning back to him, "don't make the mistake of thinking compassion puts you above the law." The door closed behind him with a quiet, final click. Ethan sagged against the counter. 72 hours, he said. "That's not much time." "It's time," Sarah replied, "and it's more than we had this morning." She turned back toward the exam room, but her phone buzzed in her pocket before she took 2 steps. She glanced at the screen and went still. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Sarah didn't answer right away. She read the message again, then looked up at him, something uneasy flickering behind her calm. "That anonymous tip?" she said slowly. "It didn't come from Pine Hollow." Ethan frowned. "Then where?" "From a number registered 3 states away," she said, "and it was placed less than an hour after you left that mailbox." The room felt suddenly smaller. "That means," Ethan said, his voice low, "whoever left those cubs isn't the only one watching." Sarah nodded. "And it means we're not just racing the clock." Outside, somewhere beyond the trees, an engine turned over and idled. Too far to see, but close enough to hear. The first pickup arrived before the sun dipped behind the trees. Ethan heard it before he saw it. The crunch of gravel, the low idle of an engine pulling in slow, cautious, as if unsure it was welcome. He stood at the front window of the rescue center, watching as an older Ford eased into the drive. A woman stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat, a cardboard box clutched to her chest. She didn't knock. She just opened the door part way and peered inside. "Dr. Mitchell?" she asked. "Someone said you might need help." Behind her, another truck rolled in, then another. Within an hour, the quiet gravel lot was dotted with vehicles Ethan recognized from decades of delivering mail. Farm trucks, sedans with rusted wheel wells, one small hatchback that belonged to the high school art teacher. People stepped out carrying blankets, space heaters, jugs of goat milk, envelopes that were thick enough not to be letters. No one asked many questions. They had heard enough. Word had spread the way it always did in Pine Hollow, not through official channels, but through quiet conversations, phone calls made after supper, the kind that started with, "Have you heard?" and ended with, "What can we do?" Sarah stood near the doorway, directing people with calm efficiency, but Ethan could see the strain in her shoulders. The 72-hour clock was ticking loudly now. Wildlife control would be back. And somewhere beyond that, the unseen watchers were still out there, patient and waiting. A familiar voice cut through the low murmur of conversation. "I figured you'd be here." Ethan turned and saw Maya Brooks standing just inside the door, camera bag slung over her shoulder, notebook already in hand. She was older than the last time he'd seen her, lines etched around her eyes, but her gaze was as sharp as ever. "Maya," he said, surprised. I didn't call you." She gave a small, knowing smile. "You didn't have to. People talk. And this story." She glanced down the hall toward the exam room. "This one's already trying to be buried." Ethan felt a flicker of unease. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." "Then you're going to want someone watching the watchers," Maya said, quietly, carefully. Sarah joined them, relief crossing her face when she saw Maya. "You came." "I did," Maya said, "and I'm not here to make this harder. I just want the truth protected until it can stand on its own." Ethan thought of the note again, of the way the words had been pressed into the paper like the writer was afraid they might disappear. Maybe this was how you protected something fragile, by not letting it vanish in silence. By evening, the rescue center no longer felt like a place waiting to be raided. It felt like a gathering point. Someone set up a folding table with coffee and soup. Another person rigged an extra heater near the exam room. People spoke in low voices, respectful, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Ethan found himself standing beside a man he hadn't spoken to in years. Caleb Hart. Caleb owned the turkey farm on the north end of town. He was known for speaking his mind and trusting little beyond his fences. When their eyes met, Ethan braced himself. Caleb nodded once. "Heard you found something you shouldn't have," he said. Ethan gave a tired smile. "That's one way to put it." Caleb shifted his weight, hands deep in his jacket pockets. "I don't like predators near my land," he said bluntly. "Never have." Ethan waited. "But I also don't like bullies," Caleb continued. His voice softened, just a notch. "And I don't like people disappearing because someone else decided they were expendable." He looked past Ethan down the hall. "My boy got sick when he was 8. Rare thing. By the time they figured it out, it was too late. You don't forget what it feels like to be told there's nothing more to be done." Ethan felt the words settle between them, heavy and shared. "I can't help much," Caleb said, "but I can make a call or two, and if anyone thinks they're going to muscle their way in here tonight—" He shrugged. "They'll have to go through more than one old man." Ethan nodded, emotion clogging his throat. "Thank you." Later, as night settled in and people took turns keeping watch, Sarah pulled Ethan aside. "We have enough supplies to get through tomorrow," she said, "and Maya's presence helps. Wildlife control won't move quietly if they know eyes are on them." "And the cubs?" Ethan asked. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "The smaller one is stable, still fragile but fighting. The other hasn't left his side." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Relief washed through him, followed quickly by fear. Relief never lasted long anymore. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bare branches. A few people lingered by the windows, peering into the dark. Then Maya's phone buzzed. She read the message, her expression tightening. She looked up at Ethan. "You might want to see this," she said, turning the screen toward him. It was a photo. Grainy. Taken from a distance. A dark SUV parked just beyond the tree line at the edge of the property, and beneath it, a single line of text. "They're closer than we thought." Ethan felt the weight of 72 hours pressed down on him all at once. Whatever came next wouldn't be decided quietly. The SUV was gone by morning. No tire tracks led back to the road. No engine noise lingered in the air. It was as if the dark shape beyond the trees had never been there at all. But Ethan knew better. Once you learned how fear moved, you didn't forget its patterns. It didn't roar. It waited. The final day passed in careful pieces. Sarah moved through the rescue center with steady focus, monitoring vitals, logging every change, every small improvement. The smaller cub's breathing remained shallow but consistent, its chest rising and falling with a rhythm that no longer sounded like a struggle. The larger cub stayed pressed close, refusing food unless it was offered beside the oxygen tent, as if proximity itself were a form of medicine. Ethan stayed nearby, mostly quiet. He found comfort in the routine, holding bottles, adjusting blankets, listening. For years after Linda died, he had believed that stillness meant emptiness. Now, he understood it could also mean attention, presence, care. By late afternoon, a white transport van pulled into the drive. This one bore the markings of a federally recognized wildlife sanctuary 2 counties over. Sarah had made the calls quietly, deliberately, choosing people who understood both the law and its limits. People who knew when rules were meant to protect and when they were being used as weapons. The transfer paperwork was signed quickly. Too quickly, Ethan thought, as if everyone wanted this moment to pass without giving it weight. Sarah lifted the smaller cub first, her hands gentle but sure. The animal stirred, eyes fluttering open just long enough to let out a faint sound before settling again. The larger cub followed, alert and watchful, its gaze fixed on its sibling as they were placed side by side in a padded carrier. Ethan felt an unexpected ache in his chest. He had known this was how it would end, or rather, how this part would end. Still, when the door of the carrier closed, something in him resisted, not because he wanted to keep them, but because letting go meant admitting how deeply they had reached into him. "You did right by them," Sarah said quietly, as if she could hear his thoughts. "I hope so," Ethan replied. The van pulled away just as the sun dipped low, staining the sky in pale orange and gray. Dust rose and settled. And then it was done. The rescue center felt emptier without the soft sounds that had filled it for days. People lingered a while longer, offering hugs, handshakes, quiet words of relief. One by one, they drifted back to their lives, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee and the echo of shared resolve. Maya was the last to leave. She stood near the doorway, phone in hand, her expression thoughtful. "I won't run the story yet," she said, "not all of it. Some things are safer left unnamed." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." Before she turned away, she hesitated. "There's something you should see." She held out her phone. It wasn't a photo this time. It was a scanned image, the note. "I had a feeling," Maya said, "so I enhanced the contrast. Look at the back." Ethan took the phone, his fingers clumsy. The familiar words stared back at him, but beneath them, faint and nearly invisible, another line emerged, smaller. Pressed so lightly, it might have been written by someone afraid to be heard. "If they find me, they'll take my kids. Not the cubs, my children." Ethan closed his eyes. All at once, the story shifted. The mailbox, the basket, the apology. It hadn't just been about saving animals. It had been about buying time, creating distance, giving someone else a chance to run. "They weren't just abandoning the cubs," Ethan said. "They were hiding." Maya nodded. "And you gave them that chance." Night fell quickly after that. Ethan locked up the rescue center and drove home alone. The road felt different now. The same turns, the same trees, but something inside him had shifted, and the world responded in kind. When he pulled into his driveway, he sat for a long moment before going inside, listening to the quiet. It no longer felt like an enemy. The next morning, Ethan returned to his route. The postal truck hummed beneath him, familiar and steady. He delivered letters and packages, nodding to neighbors, exchanging a few words here and there. Life, in its stubborn way, kept moving. When he reached the old gas station, he slowed. The wooden mailbox still stood there, leaning slightly, its paint long gone. Ethan pulled over and stepped out, the cold air sharp against his face. He opened the lid. Empty. No envelope, no note. Just the hollow space where something extraordinary had once waited. Ethan closed the lid gently. For a long time he stood there, hands resting on the worn wood. He thought of Linda, of the cubs, of a stranger who had trusted the right person would come along at the right moment. I did, he said softly, not sure who he was speaking to. I took care of them. The wind moved through the trees, carrying his words away. Ethan returned to the truck and continued on his route, the road stretching out ahead of him. He didn't know what would happen next, whether the people who had been watching would resurface, whether the family behind the note had truly escaped. But he knew this. His story wasn't over. Sometimes all it took to begin again was the courage to stop, to open a mailbox, and to answer a plea the world whispered instead of shouted. And somewhere, not so far away, 2 small lives breathed a little easier because he had. Before you go, I'd like to ask you something. If you were standing there that morning, if you were the one who opened that mailbox, what would you have done? You don't need to write much, just a few words in the comments pane, or even a single sentence is enough. I read them. And so do others who may need to know they're not alone. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause or feel something quietly shift inside, you can let me know by pressing like. It helps more than you might think. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, slow stories about ordinary people, unexpected moments, and the small choices that change everything, you're welcome to subscribe and walk this road with us. There are many more stories waiting, and sometimes all it takes is stopping long enough to listen.